Okay, so I've been given kind of a path of twofold today. One, I get to tell you a little bit about who we are at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center, and most importantly, why we were built to support amazing founders like yourselves and teams, and how we're going to help you not just in the coming weeks, but hopefully in the coming years. And then two, a little bit about my journey, because maybe it's interesting, maybe it's helpful, we'll see. But anyway, let me start with the most important part of this process, and that is telling you a little bit about the gift that I got given a year and a half ago. And it's a funny story, as often happens inside of sort of San Francisco Bay Area. I get invited in every once in a while, and people are like, how did you fall into venture? And I kind of start on this woven tale of how I landed in a spot that I never actually imagined. And I would bet if I asked each of you, what were you thinking about 10 years ago, and would you have ever mapped to the companies that you started today, chances are the answer would be no. Because life as an entrepreneur, and I think in this magic place, is about finding opportunities and recognizing places where you can double down and grow things in a really interesting way. And so kind of that is what the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center was all about. So the story starts like this. I used to lead the oldest angel investment group in Silicon Valley, actually across the United States. It was called Band of Angels. And we were largely recognized as being the original angel group of them all. We invested in all areas of high tech, and I'll talk a little bit about how I landed there. But one of the most amazing companies and founders that I got to become good friends with along the way was a company called SharesPost. And Sam Hayes eventually did a joint venture with NASDAQ Private Market, which is a secondary market offering if you follow any of the news that happens in fintech. And Sam and I used to get together for lunch every once in a while. And so he called me up one day and he's like, hey, what are you doing? And I thought he quite literally meant, what are you doing for lunch? So I was like, oh, I could do it with Italian. And he's like, well, I wasn't actually meaning food today. I was meaning a little bit more like, are you ready to make a career change? Because I've got something that I think you could be really interested in. And he starts to tell me this story about how NASDAQ Education Foundation, which has a long history of 13 years of supporting remarkable entrepreneurs that have come out of great universities and nonprofits in different parts of the globe, wanted to build something different. They wanted to build a legacy, a commitment in many ways to founders across all industries, across all sectors, and to do it in a way that wasn't currently being done. And so the entrepreneur inside of me goes, curious, tell me more. So I had a chance to come up and meet with some amazing people inside of NASDAQ, from the CEO and the CFO, the chairman and the vice chairman. And the more people that I talked to, the more that I realized there was an opportunity to design and develop something fundamentally different for founders, something that looked at success as being able to move the path forward, regardless as to where the company was at any one stage, and instead really create resources that mattered, that translated from company to the next. So it was about building an ecosystem as a remarkable talent, and then allowing them to nurture through connecting them with the best and the brightest of faculty, mentors, and teachers. And that's exactly what we've committed to doing here inside of the center. So that began my journey when I realized, as I kept waking up in the middle of the night and whiteboarding out sort of some of the ideas that I might share at the next meeting, that I kind of already made the commitment that I was doing this thing. So a year ago in January, I jumped over to NASDAQ as the founding executive director here, and we began construction. Day one, I'll never forget, came over to the space and it was nothing but a concrete shell. And I thought if it was painted white concrete, it would be absolutely perfect, because it was like the perfect blank canvas. And what we wanted to create here was something that allowed everyone coming in to be able to see themselves as successful inside of the space. So not to create too much of any one kind of like-minded process in the environment, but instead to let the founders have it for what they needed it to be. What are the challenges that you as entrepreneurs are faced with? Sometimes it's as simple as fundraising, right? Sometimes it's about growing sales. If you're lucky to get into a program like STIR, that's not so much of an issue because you're guaranteed your first customer. But even once you've got that first customer, how do you make sure that you're really going to be able to take it to the next level, right? How do you take that first referenceable and make it 6 referenceable? How do you take that 6 referenceable and scale it out from there? And a lot of the issues are in the details, and a lot of the times it's staying close to your customers. But even more importantly, it's hearing from entrepreneurs who have been there, done that recently, on what were the tricks that they used to get to market faster, to mitigate risk for your investors if they were going down that path, or to look at alternative levels of financing. And so those are the types of things that we try to deal with day in and day out here. Traditionally, inside of any given month, we're going to put on 10 to 12 programs. Everything that we design and develop is built with a pay-forward philosophy. So what do I mean by that? We don't charge for our programs. Everything that we design and build for entrepreneurs is free. A big difference for us that we're able to do this is that we have corporate partners and sponsors and individual donors that believe that somebody did the same for them at one stage. Somebody opened up their Rolodex that made that first sale possible. Some investor banked on them when they were unproven, and they were able to get to that first path of success. And so what we're trying to do here, if we're right, and I'll tell you in a couple of years' time whether or not it really does work this way, is to take a commitment of the fact that we're going to serve 2,000 founders per year, and to date we've served 1,115. And we're going to create ripples of support amongst entrepreneurs, and that the graduates of that program are ultimately going to come, teach, and train and support the next level of great innovators. If you're interested, I would be remiss to say that no matter what, you should sign up for our classes. One of our commitments to STIR is that usually as an entrepreneur, you have to come in with 2 references, because STIR is already vetted and working with you. All of our resources are open to you. So anything that you would like to start coming to attend, whether it's leadership development, whether it's sales, growth, expansion efforts, do start looking at the center as your extended home. So however we can be helpful to you in this journey is what we're committed to doing. Above and beyond that, we think we host a really interesting, engaging curriculum, and we would love to have you help shape that over time too. So that's why you'll often hear us ask, what keeps you up at night? Because if we're not close to the source, then we can't really design for what the issues are that you're facing. So we really do want to know about that. So I'm originally from England. I was born there, so I am a global entrepreneur of sorts. My father was an entrepreneur, and he moved us out to California when I was 9, and I have a younger sister. She was 3 at the time. And I will never forget the day that my dad came and told me that we were going to move to California, because I'd visited California 3 times at that time. My grandfather was an ambassador to the US Embassy, so we had come out here a lot. My aunt was a dancer actually for San Francisco Ballet and teacher there for many years, and she was married to an American military guy, and so we had come out here. But in my head as a 9-year-old, I was absolutely convinced that we were moving to Disneyland. Because when I thought California, I thought Mickey Mouse. And I was incredibly disappointed when we landed in SFO and we picked up the rental car. And my father, in typical entrepreneurship fashion, I said, okay, great, we're on our way to Disneyland. And he's like, no, we're on our way to our new home. And I said, okay, where's our new home? And he's like, we don't know yet. So all of my stuff, including, silly enough, I can still picture me at 9, even though it's probably more of a story than a truism these days, holding tightly onto my teddy bear that I had in my arms. And we stopped for lunch in this place called Modesto. Have any of you ever heard of Modesto? So the story goes like this. We stopped for lunch in Modesto, and my parents took a look around. And it was a nice enough restaurant. And they looked out and they saw nothing but acres and acres of space. And we had grown up in Brighton, which is a town in the south coast of England. And it's much more like traditional England with row homes and very tiny spaces. And my dad turns to my mom and he goes, this is America. Look at the size of these homes. This is how we know we've made it. This is what I'm working for. This is what it means to be an entrepreneur here. So they said, well, if it's meant to be, we should be able to get it all settled in within inside of an hour. And I'm like, what does that mean? So it didn't quite take an hour, but it did take an afternoon. We had a house, we had gone furniture shopping, and I was enrolled in school. So that began my entree into realizing that the path of an entrepreneur is not necessarily well defined, but it has actually got a vision in your head. It just sometimes takes a little bit of time to figure out where it actually is all going to culminate down to. In my case, it ended up being Modesto. So when I finally got to the point of going to university, I decided I was going to go back to the UK because I had a lot of relatives there that I didn't see all that frequently, and honestly, selfishly, I wanted to do a lot of traveling. So I flew back to the UK and went to Sussex University, which again is right on the south coast, and had decided that I was going to double major in law and marketing. interesting choice. I did not really have a clue at the time what I wanted to do, but I thought, yeah, they'll figure it out as I go along. And I got the bug of traveling, and I really wanted to do a lot of traveling. And I looked in the pocketbook, and I looked at what mom and dad had given me, and I'm like, it's not going to happen with what they've given me, so I better get a job. And turned out in the UK, if you're not from the UK, it's really tough to get a job. So I was like, well, that kind of sucks. So I guess I'm going to start a company in the UK. Well, it happened to be at a time when British Telecom really was taking off. I'm dating myself now, but GSM had just made a really major shift. And the giant cell phones that we used to call them, which were the big cell phones on rollerblades, and everybody, only the wealthy could afford them, and it was almost an accessory because they were this big and everyone very famous and rich had them, had completely shifted. And suddenly they were affordable for the masses. And a lot of the opportunities were focused on D2C, on direct to consumer. But I sat there and I thought, well, you know, Europe is so close, right? Here I am, I want to travel all around Europe. Wouldn't it be amazing if this actually could shift the way in which small businesses could do business with different countries, and you could power this to sales forces wherever they were, and maybe it would actually change things. So I got together with a couple of friends. We all emptied our pockets and we said, all right, let's give it a shot. Worst case that happens, we go broke and we eat pizza for a little bit longer than we might like. Best case that happens, we might be able to go do the traveling. And by the way, we're going to go meet customers, because you better stay close to your customer base. And to do that means we have to travel. Oh, darn. So I figured that no matter what was going to happen, it was going to end up being okay. Ended up getting really, really fortunate, and about 6 months into the business, we really did have a niche market. And ironically, we had a niche market with Civic, which was my first engagement in, as far as actually understanding that the power of small businesses often started with getting very close to cities. And once you understood where the decision makers and the validation points could be within cities, you could actually start tying networks up in a really interesting way. So I did that fairly successfully with these two other people, and we had a lot of money to be able to do the traveling that we wanted. And I took a bit of a sabbatical from university because I kind of felt that I'd lost my way along the path of sort of what was I driving at going to school, when really I thought a lot of the practical learning that I was getting was coming out of starting this business. Needless to say, eventually the visa kind of ran out and it was time to come back home, and Modesto wasn't quite the right fit for me anymore. So I said, okay, I really like doing this startup thing. Maybe I should go do another startup. And it was still a lifestyle business. So I left. The two other founders were British citizens. They continued it on. BT struck a deal. We continued to get residuals. I was thrilled. And so I ended up commuting 6 months, a lot longer than I would have liked to have done, from Modesto to San Mateo, where I found my second startup that I absolutely fell in love with. And very intrigued with the founders, who were ridiculously smart people out of Cal. And they had found a way in which you could find content, wherever it may exist, in the web. And unlike Google, where you had to get the right words in order to get the results that you needed, you could find wherever anyone was saying any kind of sentiment about your brand, or plagiarizing your work, or kind of trying to position themselves as being a competitor or a like-minded company. Well, that happened to be at an interesting time when there was this whole movement around DRM, digital rights management. And Adobe, of course, became the very impressive company that really took over DRM in a whole new way. And we were able to strike a deal with DRM. And we were betting on a couple of key verticals. We were betting on education, that it mattered for having this kind of access to technology inside of education. And Microsoft came along with us on that ride. And we were betting on PR. That vertical was a little unknown, but we felt for sure that there was value there. So we had to go prove a business model. We tried SaaS, but everybody looked at us and were like, that's crazy. People don't pay monthly rates. We just want to own it. We were a little early on that curve. So instead, we ended up trying to do license deals, and I raised $35 million there. So I was the first business person that was brought in. I was privileged to work with amazing technologists and learned a lot from them. But also along that way, I also have to tell you that I discovered more about what I don't know about technology and how to stay out of the way of technologists. There are certain things that is very true in business, and that is a lesson that has continued to bop me on the head every time that I've needed to be reminded of that fact. It is not my place to help design technology, but instead my place to actually work with great technologists. Lessons learned. But we did raise a lot of money, and we had a lot of acquisition interest, and I ended up getting into a point where I was doing a really interesting bake-off between Symantec and Microsoft. And we ended up choosing to go with Microsoft. But the lessons that I learned out of that, and the reasons that we thought it was a perfect fit for us, is they were so passionate and committed to the education sector, which was the very vertical that we were passionate and committed to. I mean, fundamentally, while we liked PR, and I would tell you that PR was much more financially lucrative than education, especially at the time. The passion of the founders, the passion of the team, the interest, the engagement was happening inside of academia. We thought, my gosh, if we can make that change inside of K-12, this could be huge. But Microsoft shelved us. And that kind of sucked. And that was a really interesting experience for me to fundamentally learn that acquisitions need to really be taken its time to evaluate, not in a good way or a bad way. You just need to fundamentally make sure that you're managing expectations accordingly. Now, it was the right thing for the company. Without doubt, we could never have scaled in the way that we wanted to. And they didn't shelve us indefinitely. They just shelved us in a way that we were hoping wasn't going to unfold. So then we're acquired. I had my first successful exit of that kind, and I thought, okay, got it all figured out. We're going to go do this again. So I don't know what I don't know. And there was an amazing company that had started at the time, a third company that was in e-bid procurement. It's like, oh, this sounds great. We're going to change. We're going to disrupt. The first time I think I probably used that word. We're going to disrupt the construction industry. Sounds easy. So raised a ton of venture capital there, did a ton of really interesting work there, spent a ton of money there, spent too much money there, continued to spend too much money there. Markets were shifting. Venture firms started swapping out management team, swapped it out again, swapped it out a third time. Realized it was taking a whole lot longer to convince that construction industry that they needed to change. Understood finally what it took to really commit and understand how you get close to that end consumer who's actually using it. So we'd spent a ton of time sort of theoretically visualizing what the software was going to do, talking amongst our peers of how great this was going to be, not recognizing that at the time, the people that were actually going to use the software, they had no way to input it. They had no way to use e-bids on a job site. They weren't running around with the right technology that could power that. So even if we did get a buy-go decision from some bigwig, some executive, it wasn't getting utilized. So we did this 90-day pilot project. Everyone was so excited, and we'd go back in 90 days going, didn't it change your life? And they looked at us and goes, no. Nobody used it. So the company got shut down. So that was a really tough thing, right? So here I was, one lifestyle company, it had paid dividends. I kind of liked that, had the freedom, the luxury that I was looking for. One that got acquired by Microsoft. This is awesome. Didn't make me rich in the process, but it was still good. I had a positive exit behind me. And then this one blew up in my face. And I spent months, and I still do, lamenting everything that I did wrong inside of that company. And I could still paint it out miles long, what I would do differently. And that, I think, is fundamentally what people tell you the failures teach you. Right? Theoretically, did I know that you needed to make sure customers were going to use your product if you built it? Of course. Should I have done better due diligence around whether or not the customers were actually going to use the solution that I knew they needed? Oh, yeah. Should I have been closer in the field with the end users? Without doubt. Should I have taken pen to paper and inked out how much money it was going to take and how long it was going to take to get them to change habits? Oh, yeah. And would I have done things differently? Definitely would have spent less money getting to that answer. So that was my startup world. So I was talking to some friends of mine after that very painful reminder that I didn't know it all. What a shock. And they said, well, you know, you've raised a lot of money. You're good at raising money. You should go work in investment banking. And I said, really? All right. So I went over to Credit Suisse. And I spent a couple of years at Credit Suisse. And I learned how bankers really think about how you optimize market caps on financials. And I hated it. But I learned some incredibly critical stuff that I needed out of that, right? Like, I learned fundamentally what modeling was in ways that I had to kind of do back of the envelope math for. But I didn't realize IRR. I had no idea really how markets were defined and what it meant to be in the upper quad. I just knew you drew a hockey stick and said you were up here, right? That's what it's all about. Just spit it in the pitch and investors will believe it. Not at all. There actually is math behind it, who'd have thunk? So I had a chance to learn that, and I was there through September 11th. And then at the end of September 11th, or right after it, I should say, our division was amalgamated, and I was left for the first time with a choice of either take a risk and move to New York or go do something else. And it was a pretty good moment for me to actually say, what did I want to be for the first time in my life, right? Like, I just kind of been following this path, crazy path while I was, and I didn't really have a direction. And so I did what I think was probably one of the smartest decisions I ever made in my life, and that was I asked some of the smartest people I knew, what should I be when I grow up? And rightfully so, they turned around to me and said, you kind of already know. You just need to figure out what's important to you. What do you love to do? What do you enjoy doing? Who do you want to do it for and why? What's your motivations? And so 5, 6, 8 conversations led me back to some of the guys that had invested in my second company. And these guys had created a first-time fund in Palo Alto. And they said, you know what you do pretty good at? You really talk to entrepreneurs well, and you talk about what you learned and what went wrong and what you would do differently and how they should think about valuations slightly differently. And we think you could be good at going to find other great entrepreneurs to like bring into a fund. I mean, I get to go meet really great innovators and convince them to take our money. I could sign up for that. So I did. And I was at Propel Partners for 2 years. And then I got recruited into leading Band of Angels. And I raised 2 venture funds there. I did 95 investments, all told 130 when you looked at the follow-on financings, deployed about $75 million. The most important stats that came out of that was the fact that I had the greatest mentors in the world that suddenly unfolded before me. So Band of Angels, as I mentioned, was the oldest angel investment group. But these were the founders of everything from Symantec and Hewlett-Packard, Salesforce and beyond. And they were in there rolling up their sleeves, figuring things out side by side with the founders that we were investing in, what it was going to take, like where they had gone wrong in their career. And it started making me think very differently around what failure looks like and why it's really important to embrace those moments, to recognize them and to learn from them and grow from them, and double down and ask more questions about what you can do even further beyond just the failures that you're learning. Taught me about things like why founders get so intrinsically tied into, percentage ownership, and whether that's a good discussion or a bad discussion, and how you reframe the conversation around value-added investors, not just because we wanted to win the deal, sometimes we lost it. Those were hard days when we really wanted to get into a company and we ended up not convincing the team that we were the best fit for them. But it's gonna happen. I had failures along the way, without doubt, inside of 11 years. I was incredibly fortunate to be one of the original members that started the Angel Capital Association, which was born out of Kauffman Foundation. This was the trade organization to our equivalent of the NVCA, the National Venture Capital Association. When we first started the Angel Capital Association, there were 30 recognized angel groups in the United States. By the time I left, and I'm still friendly, but I just kind of have another full-time job that I've committed to now. But when I left, there were 250 angel groups across the United States, and an expectation that that was going to grow to 700 in the next 5 years. When I first started, if you didn't have the perfect network, in fact, one of the things that I was most proud about at Band of Angels, and an appreciation for the fact that they recognized this early on, the old days, the only way you got to an angel group was to have a sponsor. And a sponsor basically means it was someone who was already committed to investing in the company, and they were bringing you in front of their friends and peers saying, you should double down and write them a check too, because I am. But for many of the greatest entrepreneurs, you may be absent that perfect connection. You may be absent that right network to get you to those right people. And so we were able to change that paradigm, not just inside a band, but inside of the entire industry. Now every single angel group has an open process for being able to get to know the best and the brightest, the most talented entrepreneurs, regardless as to whether or not you've convinced one of us to write a check before you come in to meet. Now, does it hurt to have a champion? Oh no. If you take nothing else away from this advice, if you decide to go after venture or angel, always find an internal champion. Always go talk to them before you need their money. Because trust me, that's the right strategy to apply. But nevertheless, every single one of them has a way in which you can talk to them, even if you haven't gotten their money committed to start with. And then how do you define value, right? There's so many investors. What's the right strategy for you as a founder? People forget that diligence is a two-way street. I would spend 3, 4, 6 months sometimes reviewing, evaluating, getting to know founders. Because the truth is that founders never change. You know, we were seed investors. We were the first professional money in. I guarantee you, your business is going to change, your market's going to change, what you put down as your financial projections over the next 3 years, not worth a crap. But the one thing that's not going to change, who you are. And guess what? This is a really long relationship. Most of the time, we were working with founders upwards of 11, 12 years. You want to be working with someone you don't like for 11 or 12 years? Definitely not. So, make sure that that due diligence is done on both sides of the street. Look at their portfolio. Talk to those companies that they've invested in. How do they talk about the investors? Do they lead with the fact of, well, they gave me a check? Or do they lead with the fact that they provided value to me in the moments that I needed it? I called them up when I knew everything was going to hell. And I still asked them for help. And they didn't judge, and they just said, what can we do? Those are the ones that you want beside you, if you decide that venture or angel is the right way to go. Many of the most successful companies that I've met and worked with along the way never took an ounce, didn't take $1 of outside dilutive capital. Because of where we are, it's a story that often is forgotten. But you can self-finance. You can grow through clever strategies of doing it with revenues that are driven by your customers. A lot of companies have. Dilution and ownership is a sensitive topic, and hopefully at some stage we'll have a chance to come back and talk more about it. It's certainly more than the time that I've already taken with you guys today. Thanks for your generosity. But at the end of the day, I think it's important to just note that the things I've learned along my career is ask for help when you need it by the people that you trust, admire, and respect. Recognize what you don't know, surround yourself by smart people, and be willing and open to seeing change, even when others say, it's not in Gartner's magic quad. Because chances are you may be closer to it, and chances are you're seeing things because you recognize a pain within the industry. But make sure that you're benchmarking yourself with enough time and enough cushion and enough run rate to get there successfully. And whatever you think you need, add at least 6 months. This is the last little nugget I'll give for today. Because trust me, sometimes product takes longer to get to market. Sometimes customers take longer to make that decision. And guess what? Most of the time they don't pay on time. So you don't want to be the company that goes out of business, not because the buyers weren't there, but simply because you didn't give yourself enough runway to get to see the success that you'd worked so hard for. Guys, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here. I'll look forward to seeing you again soon.